Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Geographic, and I will be your host for today. If you've been following along this month, you know that we've been looking at all kinds of exciting things in the world of biodiversity, endangered species, and of course, we always love to cover oceans whenever we can. To that effect, I'm really excited for today's event. Today, we get to hang out with Justine Ammendolia. Justine is a marine biologist, plastic pollution researcher, and science communicator based out of St. John's, Newfoundland, here in Canada. In 2014, she was awarded the National Geographic Young Explorer Grant to travel to Eastern Greenland to research Arctic seabirds and live in an off-grid hunting cabin for 6 weeks. So Justine works as a garbage detective, researching the plastic landscapes of the southern coastlines of Newfoundland through shoreline marine debris surveys and working at sea with local fishers. She attempts to understand the presence, movement, and potential for harm caused by plastic pollution in the waters around Newfoundland. So Justine, we just had you for an event a few months ago, and you must have had a good time because we've got you back already. We're excited to introduce you to a new group of students, learn a little bit more about what you do, and then we'll let the students go to town with some questions.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for inviting me in your classes today. I'm really excited to talk to you. So for the first part, I'm going to present a presentation about my career and life as a marine biologist. So, and then after that, we'll do questions. But we'll do start. So as Joe mentioned, my name, oh, sorry about that, 1 second. Yep. So as Joe mentioned, my name is Justine Ammendolia, and because I always loved going to the ocean, and it really allowed me to kind of grab my dream and make this a full-time job. So I know that most of you guys, the job list is the last on your radar. So I'm hoping to kind of open your mind with, potential jobs. As a marine biologist, I study animals that are associated with the ocean. So I've studied seabirds. I've really become interested in garbage and plastic pollution. I'm sure most of you have heard about garbage in the ocean being a really big issue. And as a biologist studying animals, it goes hand in hand to study this problem because garbage affects everyone who lives in the ocean, and it's becoming a really big issue. So for today's talk, I'm going to discuss where I grew up, how I got into study, and eventually my career path that led me to this big issue of garbage. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada. It's Canada's largest city, and it has about 6 million people right now, and you can see it's pretty far from any oceans. We're surrounded by a lot of freshwater lakes, but I always got the question growing up: is how do you get chance to see it on a daily basis? My family and I would go down.
Justine, can I pause you for just a moment?
Yep.
You're something kind of sounding a little funny with the microphone. Is there something on top of it or running over it?
No. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we kind of get you for like a good 30 seconds, and it almost sounds like muffled, like something smothering it.
That's strange. Okay. What about now, Joe?
Okay, let's try and roll and see if it cooperates with us.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yep. So growing up, I was really lucky in that I got to go to Florida every year. And, when I was about 6 years old, my family handed me a pair of goggles, and almost immediately I threw myself underneath the water. And it was my first time seeing the fish at my feet and, swimming amongst the rocks. And I got really excited as a kid. And I started thinking about all these questions. How do animals exist in nature? How do they interact with each other? And, at the time, they seemed like really simple questions, but these are the kind of thoughts that, marine biologists have to think about on a daily basis. So I kind of held on to that passion. And, as I grew up, I found other ways to kind of throw myself into the water and not want to leave. And essentially, I ended up going, after I went through elementary school and high school, I managed to go to university where I got the opportunity to go down to the Caribbean to study corals. And you can see me here diving into this massive coral reef. And one of the biggest highlights of this experience was feeling really tiny, because you can see that surrounding me there are a whole bunch of animals there. And, having the chance to be completely surrounded by nature and go out into the ocean and ask these really awesome questions in biology was really, really inspiring. So I held on to that passion. But I realized at the time that, as much as I liked the warm climate, I really wanted to do marine biology in Canada, or if anything, a northern environment. So when I went to university, like how you guys are listening to me talk now, I heard a speaker um, talk about her experience up in the Arctic. And this is almost like the equivalent of your teacher. This is Dr. Shoshanna Jacobs, and she was my teacher at the time, who was talking about her experience up in the Arctic studying seabirds. And after listening to her speak, I got really excited about this whole idea of birds living in the Arctic and how they interact with the ocean. So after I listened to her talk, I asked her if she could ship me off to the Arctic to go and study biology like she did. So what ended up happening was we picked a location. So if you haven't seen Greenland before, it's one of the largest islands in the world in the Arctic, and it is absolutely beautiful to study seabirds. So we made a project, and I ended up getting shipped off to this beautiful place called Cap Haug, Eastern Greenland. And you can see in the corner there all the birds. This is home to about 2 million seabirds. So it's a really, really important area for these birds to live during the summer. But you can see it's pretty far off from any big city. So you actually have to charter a helicopter to get there, and you can see me over there. And it was really exciting for me because I was kind of thrown into this world of planning expedition logistics. So, when you see people on TV go up to really remote places and they have to go to really extreme measures, I got a taste of that world. So when we lived in this bird colony, where the bird's home was, we were about 300 feet below them. So you can see our home in the circle there is actually a tiny, tiny cabin. And it had no electricity or running water or any of that. And, we would have to hike up every morning to see the birds by about 300 feet. So if you can imagine waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning and going up for a hike, that's basically how our day was with the research. Now, our cabin, again, no electricity, no running water. And for someone like myself from a big city who's never lived like this for 6 weeks straight, it was a really eye-opening experience. We also had to eat a lot of canned food. So if you can picture canned fish and crackers, that was basically our diet for a few weeks. And also we had to take ice from the ocean and melt it for our drinking water. And actually, during this period, we couldn't even take baths because, like I said, there's no showers there. One of my favorite parts was actually the toilets and the washrooms there. If you can see, the toilet was actually outside of our cabin, and it had the best view in the house. And if you can picture this, when you're out in this location, there's only 3 people around you, but you're more likely to run into a polar bear than you are other people. So the birds I studied were called little auks, and they look like miniature penguins, and they're about the size of a can of Coke. And they're super awesome birds to study because when they come to land, you get to interact with them and hold them and do basically find more out about their lives. So my project was pretty simple. It was to grab these birds and put little backpacks on them, and these backpacks were electronic. And what they would do is they would take information about where the birds were flying. So my question was to see, where are the birds getting their food in the ocean? Because as you can imagine, we didn't have a ship with us, and I couldn't follow the birds on a boat. So the easiest way for biologists to answer these questions are to put these little trackers on them. Now, the problem with my project was I got all the trackers on the birds, but I couldn't get them off because the trackers fell in the ocean. And I panicked at this point because I thought, oh my gosh, my project's gone and I'm never going to be able to finish it. But, as a biologist, you really have to learn how to think on your feet, even when things go really wrong. So my logical suggestion, or my logical solution for this was actually not to study the tracker or the tracks of the birds because they lost them all, but instead to study their poop. So you can see here, those little containers are actually filled with samples of bird poop. And my whole goal was to basically study what the birds were eating. And you can do this by looking at their different poop. So, this experience as a whole was really eye-opening. Not only did it teach me how to become a problem solver and learn how to make the best of a bad situation, but it also opened up my eyes to how beautiful our environment and nature could be. Having this experience, like this was my office view for 6 weeks, and I was really lucky to be one of the only people in the world who's been up to this location. And for me, I was really passionate afterwards about conservation. So it really shocked me when I got back home and I found out that the birds in this picture were actually eating plastic in the ocean. And I'm sure most of you have heard about, garbage being a really big issue now. And you can see from this picture that this is supposed to be an iceberg. It looks like a chunk of ice in the Arctic, but instead what it is, it's a shopping bag. And it just goes to show, how common this issue is around the world and how humans are kind of creating this massive problem. Now, the thing with plastic pollution is a lot of it is big, like the shopping bags. But the majority of what we find in the oceans is actually, they're super tiny pieces of plastic. So microplastics are smaller than the size of a grain of rice. And what's really tricky about this problem is that really when big plastics break up, they create these tiny pieces. But then you have a whole bunch of different types. They come in different shapes, sizes, materials, chemistries. They have different toxins associated with them. So the issue gets really complicated. So now, ever since learning about this issue, I've become a bit of a garbage detective. I'm really interested in going to beaches and seeing what kind of plastic is on the beach and where is it coming from? What are the sources? Is plastic coming from close by places, or is it coming from far away places by ocean currents? And, it's been a really interesting job so far. So I live right now on an island on the east coast of Canada called Newfoundland, and it's the furthest out east you can get. Now, with my job, I work with the Placentia Bay Ocean Debris Survey team, and what we do is we visit we go and do garbage detective work on the same beaches over and over every month. And you can see this is an example of what it is during the summer, but this is winter. It's a typical Canadian image, lots of snow, lots of ice, very high winds. And, it's not always a pleasure to work in, but it's really important to understand how plastic exists in the environment at all times of the year. So I actually hit the beach with 3 other colleagues that I work very closely with. And we basically strike poses like this and look for big pieces of garbage, small pieces, medium sizes. And what we're trying to do is, again, map out what plastic pollution looks like in the environment. But if you look at the scene behind us, there's a whole bunch of houses. So even though I was working in a very remote place in Greenland where no one lived, in this picture here, I'm working in people's backyards. And the thing is that, as a scientist, you don't always have the answers with regards to what garbage you're finding. And actually talking to people who aren't scientists can offer a lot of information. So with our work, I'm quite lucky in that we get to do community beach cleanups where we get community members involved, and they're actually telling us really important information because at the end of the day, even if you're not a scientist and you're looking out into nature and you can see trends and patterns, you have as valuable knowledge as us on the science side do. So some examples of the garbage that we find. This is a Tide bottle, so it's laundry detergent that your parents use to clean clothes. And you can see it's all burnt up and it looks really chewed out. And this is what happens in communities where garbage disposal facilities aren't close by. So there's no garbage trucks that come by certain people's houses because they're pretty far from cities. And at the end of the day, people have no choice but to burn garbage, which is really sad because a lot of the times people think they're getting rid of their garbage, but in fact, they're just becoming a different form. Now, another thing that we find that really always kind of makes me laugh is plastic flowers. Every time I walk past these things on the beach, I always think they're real. And again, you can see the different types and shapes and colors. So it just goes to show how far this plastic problem is that we're finding pieces that look like nature that are in fact plastic. But mostly what we find is fishing gear. I know there's a classroom from Connecticut. You might have seen this around. This is called a buoy. It's what fishermen use to basically put on the side of their boats and also mark their traps. And it's a really big piece of plastic. But what we do find a lot of is the rope. So you can see all these little threads are coming off the big piece of rope. And this actually happens when the rope's exposed to a lot of sun and wind and it starts to break apart and crumble. It was really exciting when we were able to look at these microplastics, these really small pieces of plastic, and make that connection as to where they were coming from. because a lot of the times when you find plastic that's really tiny, it's hard to understand the origins or what it was actually part of at one point. So now when we do our science, we try to integrate citizen science technologies. And that means anyone who's not a formal scientist, who doesn't have the training, that means they can do science as well as we can. The app that we have on our phone is called Marine Debris Tracker, and it's free to download, and anyone in the world can use it. And what's wonderful about it is that when we pick up garbage, we log everything with this app. And what it tells us, or what it does, is all this information goes to a global database. So anyone in the world can access this information and learn more about the garbage in their backyards. And you can use it if you're in a city, if you live by the ocean like me, or if you live, by a lake. So now we also use do-it-yourself technologies, and that means that anyone who wants to build some of the scientific tools can. What you see is a little net in the water that was developed by one of our colleagues, and the trawl is called the Low-Tech Aquatic Debris Instrument. And instead of spending thousands of dollars on a high-tech science model, you can actually build this yourself for a couple $100s, which is pretty cool. And that basically allows us to collect all the different types of plastic in the water and see what's going on. We also work really close with locals, like I said. When we go out at sea, we actually go on fishing boats. And the fishermen are really helpful with helping us pick our scientific locations because, again, they know their backyard way better than we do. So they offer really, really good information, and it's great working with them. Another way that we look at plastic in the environment that I've done with other projects is actually going on fishing boats and collecting fish. Fish sometimes eat plastic, and it's really important to understand what's going on in these big food webs and seeing how plastic can work its way into different animals. So you can see from these pictures here, it's a lot of fish guts. And it's not the cleanest job, or it actually gets quite smelly at times, but it's actually really interesting once you start to look inside of animals and see how this material works its way up into food webs. So that being said, marine biology is a really awesome field to get into, and it hasn't been, I've really taken a lot of different roads that I never thought were available, and yeah, studying life choices so far because it's such a big issue that we can all contribute to in our own way in terms of solving it. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear them. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, Justine, thank you so much for sharing that presentation with us. Marine biology, it looks like it's taking you some amazing locations, and right here in Canada, some places that many students may not have had a chance to explore yet. So yeah, that first spot where you were working with the little marine birds looked absolutely incredible.
Thank you, Joe.
And I think that's one of the cool things is that science can take you to some of these places that not a lot of people get to visit. And those are some of the places we need the most information about. So another really cool perk of getting into something like science or marine biology is the places it can take you.
Oh, for sure.
All right, excellent. Well, Justine, I'm going to open things up to our classroom. So we'll start introducing the classrooms, boys and girls. Anything's fair game about plastics or marine biology, or some of the cool places that Justine has visited. So let's get started with a classroom. Let's go to, let's see, Mrs. Sherry in Guelph, Ontario has some grade fours hanging out with her. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade fours? Oh, and fives. All right, even better.
Oh, great.
Who has a question for Justine? Come nice and close for us.
Want to come up first? Okay, come on up.
Before you became a full-time marine biologist and scientist, did you ever have any other professions you wanted to go into?
That's a really good question. Actually, I think my first professional endeavor was selling candy in elementary school. I used to I was a bit of a businesswoman at the time. I used to get candy from, wholesale companies, and then I would sell it actually. So I really liked business. I never pursued it though, because I thought studying animals would be a lot cooler than making money in terms of making millions of dollars. So yeah.
All right, very cool. So we'll never know what your career as a candy tycoon could have been, but it sounds to me like you're having fun doing what you're doing now.
Yeah.
All right, very cool. Well, we're going to come back to that group in Guelph, but let's go meet another one of our classrooms. Let's go to another fourth grade classroom. Mrs. Erickson has some students hanging out with her in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. Looks like they're with Mrs. Miles as well. How are we doing, Connecticut?
What type of fish did you take from the fishermen?
Oh, for sure. So the fish is called Atlantic cod, and it's actually quite popular in fish and chips. So if you're eating fish and chips on the East Coast, you're most likely eating cod. So that's a really important fish to look at, because cod like to eat on the bottom of the ocean, and that's where they get a lot of their food at certain times of the summer. So it's really informative for biologists, because when we look inside their bellies, we can see a snapshot about what the fish are actually eating on the bottom of the ocean, and that's where some plastics wind up. So yeah, I was looking at cod, but you can look at all sorts of fish. I know scientists all over the world have been looking at fish to look for plastics, and it's in the hundreds of different species. So yeah, and you can do this really easily when you work with fishermen, because you don't actually, as a biologist, I don't have to go and kill a fish for science, but instead what we do is, when we take the stomachs from the fishermen, it's basically parts of the animal that they would throw out to the seagulls anyways. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 deal, in that the fish is going to be eaten by someone, but then you're also going to get the stomachs for science.
All right, very cool. So Justine, you mentioned cod, and some students might not know this, but hundreds of years ago, there were stories of there being so much cod in the ocean that you could almost walk across, and then the populations crashed due to overfishing. How are things looking right now? Are they starting to rebound with better protection?
Yeah, so that's the million-dollar question that everyone's been waiting for out east, and there are signs that cod populations are stabilizing and they're starting to slightly improve. The thing is that humans sometimes, instead of managing our populations so that they grow, some people get a bit greedy and they want to take more than they can, that's sustainable for the populations. And with cod right now, it's been 25 years ever since this population just kind of dropped really quickly. In that, for 25 years, the government in Canada has been very careful to let people fish high numbers again, because they want the fish to come back and they want the populations to grow again. So there is a protection in place right now, but we're hoping that, at least from a biology side, to give them a little more time, so that everyone can kind of get up to good numbers and that we don't ever have to experience a collapse like that. So things are improving, but cautiously.
All right. Always good to hear that there's some improvement. Let's see. Let's go out. Well, we've got a grade 6 classroom who are hanging out in Newfoundland, so they're probably not too far from you, Justine, Mrs. Wall's class at St. James Elementary. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, Mrs. Wall's class? Good. All right. Who's got a question for Justine?
How many plastic is found in the ocean every year?
Ooh, that's a great question. So we actually don't, that's a really, really good question. I'm going to hold on to that one, because we actually don't have an answer for that yet. The thing is that we don't really quite know. We can okay, so in the world, a lot of plastic is produced every year. I think we're over 100 million tons of plastic. And the problem is that it's really hard to track plastic when we go to the supermarket and we buy some cheese, for example, and there's plastic wrappers. Because as most of the Newfoundlanders know, is that our garbage dump is pretty close to the ocean, and it's really hard for us to measure how much of that plastic from like those cheese wrappers and from garbage from our houses end up in the ocean because it's being blown over the cliffs. So I can find you a number, but it's a pretty tricky question right now that we're working on. So, but it's really good to see a class from Newfoundland. I'm excited for that.
All right, very cool. Now I know in the Planet or Plastic, so that Nat Geo article, that they estimate that something like what is it? Is it 900 million tons garbage or plastic is making to the ocean each year. So like a dump truck every minute kind of a thing. So that's a lot, but you're right. Getting it from one little area like Newfoundland would be really tough to do. A lot of research has to go into that.
Mm. Yeah.
All right.
And when you put it in numbers like that, it gets really scary. So my advice, even when thinking it, like when we're all trying to think about how can we make plastic pollution less bad for the ocean, is we really want to take it on local scales, because when you think about the big picture globally, it gets really terrifying with the dump truck every minute. So yeah, definitely doing local work is good. And Newfoundland actually was the second province in Canada to ban plastic bags. So taking small steps as a community to reduce the amount of plastic that we consume on a daily basis is a really good step to do that.
All right, absolutely. And I think thinking at the community scale is really good for efforts, because it's something you can understand and you can feel like you're having an impact on when you're working at the community level.
Mm-hmm.
All right, where should we go now? Let's go to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Some more grade 6s with Mrs. Moore. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade 6s?
Hey, Joe. Can you hear us?
We gotcha.
Okay, I got a question for you. Go ahead.
What is the most amazing thing you have experienced as a marine biologist?
Oh wow, that's a loaded question. I have to say, this is gonna sound it's a funny story actually. When I was in Greenland, in the middle of the night, it's constant sunlight, right? So it never gets dark. You have sun 24 hours. So I was working really late one night, and I was by myself up on the cliff, and I remember thinking how I was going to solve this problem of everything going wrong with my project, because at the time the birds never came back, and I was freaking out thinking my life was over. And as I was kind of thinking by myself on the cliff, I heard a really strange noise behind me. And it was almost like a yelping sound from a dog, but it also sounded like a monkey almost. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And when I turned around, I noticed it was an Arctic fox, and he had his leg up like he was going to pee on my backpack. And in that moment of seeing this fox about to pee on my backpack, I had a full conversation with him, because I think I was going a bit crazy at the time. But I remember that fox just kind of scaring me and then making eye contact for 3 minutes. We were just staring intensely at each other. It brought me back to reality, and it really taught me that at the time, whatever problem you're facing, the world's still going on around you. And even though humans, we have cities and we have these massive communities that we live in, when we're out in the middle of nowhere, we share these habitats with animals like foxes. And, sometimes they might want to pee on your backpack, and you just kind of have to talk reason to them. So yeah, that was my funniest moment, but also my most humbling for sure, was talking to the fox in Greenland.
All right, very cool. It would have been even stranger if the fox was talking back. You would definitely have known that maybe you're losing it a little bit.
Yeah, just a tad.
All right, let's go to Waterloo, Ontario. Here in Canada, Mr. Mervin's grade 7s are joining us. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade 7s?
Hi.
All right, who's up?
Now that people have manufactured decomposable plastic bags, do you think people are going to dump more into the ocean?
Please come to the office. Olivia.
That's a really great question. So the thing with biodegradable products is depending where you live, they can be useful. Recycling and garbage collection is a really, really complicated system, and every state, every province, whether you're in Canada or the US, has their own way of dealing with like biodegradable products. And biodegradable products sometimes need a lot of heat to break down. So even though they say that, they'll break down into nature when you put them in a garbage pile, sometimes what they mean is that you have to put them under high heat for them to actually break down. And that heat sometimes isn't there in nature. It's not there in the garbage dumps. So I'm hoping that with biodegradable products, people don't jump onto it and be like, I'm going to use twice as much plastic as I did before because this is biodegradable. But what people should really kind of consider is, how much do we need in our daily lives? Like when you go out and if you want to buy tea or coffee, bringing a mug or a travel mug or something like that, where you can use it thousands of times for your entire lifetime, is much more sustainable than getting something that's biodegradable. So I'm hoping that people are more aware right now that we don't need the amount of plastic we use. At the end of the day, any piece of plastic we use right now, the ones that aren't biodegradable necessarily, will be here hundreds of years after we die. So we really have to all keep that in mind. Is it's not about jumping to another source, but instead looking at how much we use and trying to reduce that from the start.
All right, Justine, that is such an awesome point. It's very easy to get caught up in technical solutions for problems, but the best thing we can do is just use less, become more efficient. Excellent question and a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's start swinging through our classrooms again. Back to Mrs. Sherry's group. Do you guys have another question?
We do.
So there's this animal that runs on water. How does that happen?
Mm.
Do you know the animal's name?
No. Yeah.
Is it some kind of lizard?
Yeah, it's some kind of lizard. How does he look?
I think, I'm not an expert in that, but I think those lizards have specialized feet that have a certain type of chemical that allows them to, it separates itself from water. And with the way they position themselves and the speed at which they go, those specialized feet, they're almost like special shoes that they're able to do that. But I've seen videos of that lizard, so I can look into that answer. But maybe Joe might have an answer for that.
Yeah, I definitely heard of those. That's the basilisk lizard. And I mean, if you've seen them, it's a great way that they can kind of escape from predators, is they can do that kind of short run over the top of water, but they can't do it forever. So I think it's a combination of like surface area, their feet are really wide, and speed. And so if you watch, they can do it for a little bit, but eventually they're going to kind of sink slowly into the water. But cool question, and a very cool kind of lizard that we definitely don't have around here in Canada. Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. Mrs. Miles and Erickson's group in Connecticut, your microphone is on again.
Have you had any jobs you wanted to do before your marine?
For sure. Yeah. So I was always interested in marine biology, and that was my #1 pick. But like I said before too, is like, I really like the idea of business and being able to sell things that people want to buy. But to be honest with you, marine biology was always on my list. Because the thing is that with this job, even though you don't go in making millions of dollars, because no person in biology ever says they want to go in and become a millionaire, you do get to go to some of the most beautiful places on the planet. And there's all these opportunities that open up wide for you. And even if you were to go into a type of job where you make a lot of money, you still couldn't pay to have the experience that you do as a marine biologist, just because you get to spend a lot of time, weeks sometime in some of the most remote places on the planet. So I look at other job options before that I was thinking about, like going into business and making money, and never really considered it after I got into this. All right.
And I mean, who can blame you? You look at that toilet with the view that you showed earlier. That's a pretty impressive perk.
Oh, for sure.
All right, Newfoundland, Mrs. Wells' class, your microphone is on.
How many places have you been?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. I haven't really counted actually before. Countries, probably about 7 or 8. But the thing is that as your classroom knows, Newfoundland is such a beautiful province. And when you look at the island's the size of California in size, and there is a fraction of the people. We don't have very many people on island. So when you look at where you can go in Newfoundland, you can spend your whole life being on this island and still not seeing everything. So when I look at where I've been in the world, I think about what I haven't done yet. Because I don't like to think about like, oh, I've been here, because at the end of the day, you can live in one province and still not see everything. So in terms of Newfoundland, I've been very lucky to be working in Placentia Bay, so about 2 hours from town on the south coast. But I would really, really like to get up to the north part of the island, St. Anthony's and around there. So, yeah.
All right, great question. North Carolina, Mrs. Moorescott, your microphone is on again.
Okay, we're coming back up, Joe.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
Did anyone discourage you from being a garbage detector?
Right on. My parents were actually really supportive of it. I think when I told them what I was doing, they gave me like thumbs up too, because, you know, when you go through 8 years of school, sometimes do you think, like, it comes to your mind, is going through all this school worth it to be a garbage detective, to pick up garbage? But yeah, my family was very supportive of it. And to be honest with you, the work that I've been doing now has been really great, because when I talk to people who aren't in science or, you know, doing other things, they're quite supportive of the work with studying plastic pollution, because it's such a big issue right now in our environment. So I've had actually a lot of thumbs up for the work that I'm doing with doing garbage detective work. So yeah, it's been all positive on my end. Lucky for me.
All right, back to Waterloo. Mr. Mervin's grade 7s, your microphone is on.
What's the most common seabird you've ever seen?
Oh, the most common one. That's a good question. In my backyard, I see a lot of seagulls, a lot of gulls. And that's because I live about 2 minutes away from the ocean, and also extremely close to a garbage dump. So the thing is that when we think of gull species, we always think, you know, sometimes they end up in cities, sometimes they're on the coastline, but they're really attracted to garbage. So right now, I think the garbage dump is actually maybe a 10-minute drive from my house. And there's about 30,000 gulls that live at this dump, because what they do is they're really, really smart. They see a lot of food in the garbage that we throw out, and they're really quick to live in those areas and pick out the garbage so that they have an easy food source. So I see a lot of gulls. I also see, not like on a regular basis, but Atlantic puffins. I don't know if you've seen the birds with the really colorful beaks and the bills. I see those quite often around the coastline. But yeah, a lot of gulls, I would have to say.
All right. So Justine, we're getting short on time, but I wanted to ask a question about what's coming up for you. If there was a dream project you could pull together, what would it be and where?
Oh, that's such a good question, Joe. I would really like to get a better understanding about how plastic exists. Like, I would like to do a project where I look at plastic and think about it like a person almost. How does its life play out? How do you get a really big piece of plastic that has a practical source, like, you know, a bag, and watch it break down over time and see where it ends up and how it evolves and changes? Almost like how humans grow up and, you know, we get a job, we kind of evolve and change over time. Plastic is almost like a person in that way, that, you know, it can break up, it can get more complicated because it can take on different chemicals from the ocean. And, you know, at the end of the day, I would love to see how a bag like this breaks down over time, and to see, you know, where it ends up in the world, track it from where it enters the environment to where the final resting place is, if that even exists. So yeah, I really like the idea of studying the small stuff.
All right, very cool. And one more thought, just with the fish, that when you do look inside of their stomachs, how long has that project been going for?
For sure. So that was actually done in collaboration with, or actually I was the assistant for my partner who's doing her master's at the Marine Institute. So Jacqueline Saturno is a National Geographic explorer. And she worked on Fogo in 2017 on an island with fishers. And the collections were done for 1 year. So she's doing that for her master's. But I've collaborated on projects in Newfoundland where cod have been monitored from 2016, so a few years. And basically, I collaborated on a project where there was a baseline published on how much plastic fish eat in Newfoundland. So that was over a few years of data. But to my knowledge, it's ongoing with that research group.
Okay, very cool. So for students who don't know, a baseline is when you're finding out what things are like. So then in the future, you can see how they've changed. So I have a feeling that probably going to start seeing even more plastics, unfortunately, in the stomachs of fish as more does break down and appear in our oceans. All right. Well, Justine, always great when we can steal a little bit of your time. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, sharing your work. It's important work. And hopefully we've got a few more students excited about marine biology and thinking a little bit more of that as a future career. Classrooms, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thank you for your awesome questions as always. Justine, if there's more questions, are you okay if they tweet some at you later?
Oh yeah, for sure. Whenever, yeah, through any social media channels. And also I have, if the classrooms are interested, I have an Instagram account that I regularly update with pictures of the garbage detective work we do. So it gives you a nice little visual guide into the different sites we visit and the different objects we find. So yeah.
All right, very cool. Well, I can share those links with the classrooms. The last thing I'll do for today is I'm going to turn all the microphones on. Boys and girls, feel free to get a little loud, say a nice goodbye and thank you to Justine, then we'll sign off for today. So here we go. Microphones are coming on. All right, always ready and always do a great job at that. Thank you so much, class. Thank you so much, Justine. We'll see you guys in the next session. Thanks so much, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe.